Welcome into another episode of the Autzen Audibles podcast here on a Wednesday afternoon. Big football game. The first time I will be hitting the road this season, heading to Iowa City. We've got David Eicholt of HawkeyInsider on here to help us preview Oregon, Iowa. David, thank you for jumping on. This is going to be a lot of fun. Excited to see you in person out there at Kinnick. What's the anticipation level? I know it's a sellout.
I mean, it's high, man. I mean, this is the first ranked matchup that Iowa's hosted since the Penn State game in 2021 when Iowa upset them. It was 3-4. Of course, Sean Clifford got hurt. That Penn State team wasn't exactly what everybody thought it was going to be. Then Iowa got upset by Purdue the following week after catapulting to number 2 in the rankings. But I mean, it's a huge opportunity. I mean, it's college football playoff implications for both teams. Don't know if I would have said that about Iowa entering the season. I thought they'd be a good team. I didn't think they'd be where they are now. But it's a lot of fun, man. But I'll tell you, I know you've probably brought it up on your board. It's probably been talked about, but could not imagine a conference matchup with playoff implications between Iowa and Oregon if you had told me that 8 years ago. So this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited about it.
Well, let's do the Kirk Ferentz part first because you kind of it actually blew my mind. He was the offensive line coach in 1989. I think that was one of the last times these two schools met, and he's been the head coach for like 26 seasons. I actually asked Dan Lanning, Oregon's head coach, today just about like what it's like to coach against somebody who's been a mainstay at a program that long, and he has a ton of admiration for Kirk. I think Oregon fans are hopeful that Dan will maybe not put in 2+ decades like that with the program, but that he'll be here for the long haul as well. What's it like covering a program where the head coach is, I don't know, is somebody who's just been there probably almost like your entire life and has been a kind of just like a fixture in that community in a way that's so unusual in modern college football?
Yeah, and just for perspective, I was 4 when Kirk Ferentz became the head coach for Iowa, right? He's just such a pillar to the state as a whole. I mean, what he's accomplished and kind of what he's built, it's nothing that will be ever replicated. And what I mean by that is look at the way college football is moving right now, right? There's no patience anymore. And that's something that obviously Kirk is not thrilled about from his vantage point. I don't think we'll ever see a coach in a state and a team be together for 27 years. And I'll be honest with you, I think Kirk's got another 3 or 4 in him. I will not be surprised if Kirk Ferentz signs one more contract before it's all said and done. But he's become such a fixture within the Iowa community. He's donated millions to the hospital. He's kind of re-ups Iowa's national prestige, because if you go back to like the mid 80s, like the early 90s, like Iowa was a very good football program. I don't want to say it was ever elite, but that 1985 season, that 1-2 matchup between Iowa, Michigan, when Hayden Fry was the mainstay there. Kirk Ferentz was the offensive line coach. He came from Pittsburgh, had no ties to the state of Iowa. It's almost like it was a perfect marriage between a community and a coach that had no reason to adopt the Midwest culture. This is a guy who's been an East Coast guy all of his life, moved to the Midwest not knowing what to expect. He was an English teacher for a couple of years. I believe he coached women's middle school basketball while he was an English teacher on the East Coast before he became a football coach. So I just think there's such a respect and such an admiration, and just with all the chaos that there is around college sports, like he's been among the most stable forces in college football. And again, I just don't see it ever replicating. And I think Kirk Ferentz will be the first person to tell you that as well.
Let's go to this season. I had this marked down on the calendar going into the year, the second most difficult game on Oregon's schedule behind Penn State. Whoops, didn't realize Indiana was going to be this good. My bad on that one. But I actually had them third. I was proud of that because I think Indiana, there were some question marks going into the season about just how good they would be. But this game I had circled on the calendar for a couple of reasons. Obviously, Kinnick was one of the places I was told by everybody at Big Ten Media Day the last couple of years, kind of getting to know the Big Ten 24/7 crowd. Like, this is one of the toughest places to play. This is a place that is really difficult, even on teams that come in that are more talented. So that part stood out. And then looking at the roster, I think we all know, even if you're from the West Coast and you don't watch a ton of Iowa football, but the defense is always going to be one of the best in the country. Phil Parker's done a fantastic job. That's a name that's even known out here. My point of curiosity and why I was a little higher on Iowa than maybe some were, at least from my perspective, was just because of the addition of Mark Gronowski, a quarterback who's extremely productive at South Dakota State. What has his addition meant to this program? And I ask because it's an offense that's 9th in the Big Ten in scoring, but still like one of the least productive from a yards per game perspective. And people, I think, have the understanding that Iowa is awesome defense, not a lot of offense. Is that changing from your perspective, or is it still the defense kind of feeding this offense? Because I was a little staggered by like Minnesota, 41 points on the board, 274 yards. I think 38 against Minnesota and like 315. What would you say just about that dynamic with this team?
I mean, I think this is the most balanced team they've had since probably 2016. I mean, the passing game needs to get better. I've said, like, the passing stats are not great. I think there's multiple reasons for that. One, again, Gronowski was here in January. He was not fully cleared until summer, right? So you kind of miss all of that. And this is Iowa. Tim Lester's only second year as Iowa's offensive coordinator. They've had to revamp everything compared to what was being done by Brian Ferentz. And again, that's just sort of a dynamic that I've had to cover through the last few years between trying to keep Kirk Ferentz happy, but knowing like they had to make a change with Brian Ferentz. Sure. I think Iowa has a top 3 offensive line in college football. If they win the Joe Moore Award, I will not be surprised. I think they should at least be a finalist. Logan Jones, 5th-year center. Jang Sunker is probably a second-round draft pick at offensive tackle. They are far and away by Pro Football Focus. And I don't think Pro Football Focus is perfect, but I do think it's good for a lot of reasons. Yeah. But there was a time, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, I need to double-check it now to see if it's changed, where every one of Iowa's starting offensive linemen were the top in the position in college football. One was second. So if that tells you anything about where they're at, I think that does. I think Tim Lester has installed a lot of great running schemes. I think Mark Gronowski has been unbelievable with his legs. And ultimately, like, what matters is he's a gamer. He makes plays when you need him most. Everybody talks about the Indiana game, about how close the game it was, and something that I've kind of stood toe on, and I've been not upset with the national media, but they haven't brought up. Mark Gronowski was injured with 9 minutes to go in that game, and they were tied. There is a very legitimate argument where if Mark Gronowski is healthy, Iowa wins that football game. No, I'm not saying it would have happened, but like,
no,
it was more likely that it would have happened, right? It was only a second game when Iowa had a chance to go on a game-winning drive against Iowa State. Iowa State's been exposed a little bit. But Gronowski leading an 11-point comeback against Penn State is just something Iowa fans have not seen. Right? So that's where you have a quarterback who's mobile. You have a really good defense that, quite frankly, has no reason to be this good. Because you lose Jay Higgins. You lose Nick Jackson, who is the second leading tackler in college football history. Obviously, Cooper DeJean left a couple years ago. But you lose all the guys that came back for one final year. I think they lost 8 defensive starters going into the season. And Phil Parker just reloads. And that's going to be the one big matchup is like TJ Hall has been spectacular. Can TJ Hall defend more? And I don't know that, but it's also a senior versus a freshman, and we'll see what the weather is going to be like. But this is by far Iowa's most balanced team. The run schemes, the pre-snap motion, Mark Gronowski's intelligent and chess match that he puts on with defenses. He's been great with the RPOs. And another thing I will not be surprised if Iowa throws in there, man. I don't know how familiar you are with the slow mesh offense.
I am.
They might be looking to do a little bit of slow mesh against Oregon. They've run it a couple of times this year, and they said they're holding nothing back. And, you know, Warren Ruggiero from Wake Forest is now on Iowa staff as an offensive analyst, and he's kind of the godfather of the slow mesh. And they've had an extra week to prep it and to prepare for it. I don't think Iowa's going to hold anything back. So this is just a really balanced football team. I think Iowa's defense has really turned it up a notch here over the past, 3-4 weeks or so. Iowa's passing game is not great. And that's why, again, I'm so intrigued about what the weather's going to be like. And if they are going to try to follow that Indiana blueprint and test them vertically, because Erik, I'm not going to lie to you. I don't think any reasonable Iowa fan, nobody's going to say Iowa's going to try to out-athlete Oregon. They're not. They're not naive enough. Right? They're not naive enough. But I'll be very interested in the chess match on both sides of the ball. And again, I think even if Iowa ends up going 8-4 this season, man, this is the most balanced team they've had. And I think it's probably the best team they've had in the last 7-8 years.
The slow mesh is something we're familiar with. Stanford ran a little bit of that. I think they also had a Wake Forest coach that came out here. So we saw a little bit of that. That always adds just a different wrinkle, and especially a rush offense like Iowa that throws a lot at you. That would be an interesting thing to see pop up. Thanks for bringing that up. That was not on my radar. Can't say I watch every single snap I was run this year or broken it down quite like that. So that's good intel.
I don't think many people have, based on the narrative, so I don't blame you.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about this offensive line, because that also stood out to me. I actually looked through the PFF grades. They all 5 starters are top 10 in the Big Ten overall amongst offensive linemen based on grades. I think they were all top 3 or 4 at their position nationally when I looked. So maybe a little bit different than what you saw, but very comparable. And that was one of the things that stood out to me when I was kind of doing my Iowa deep dive during the bye week, was just, this is an offensive line that is super legit. It's going to be the best Oregon plays all season. And it's important because of the way Iowa plays football. Iowa plays football more like what Stanford did in 2010 to about 2016, which was always a thorn in Oregon's side. Like, you're preparing for these spread offenses, and then suddenly here comes a team that's going to play very, very differently. Not that there aren't spread principles, but they want to mash you in the phone booth there. They want to line everybody up and just push you around. I'm going to be fascinated by how that plays out. What is it about this group? I know you mentioned a couple of the names earlier, but all 5 of these guys are highly regarded. How many of these guys have been playing together for a while? What is the I guess just the connectiveness, that they've had over the last couple of years? Because you look at Oregon has a lot of talent, brought in some high level portal players, but not a lot of time spent together, not a lot of starts. What is kind of the difference there for the Hawkeyes?
I mean, I think you got to give first and foremost credit to offensive line coach George Barnett. I mean, this is a guy who's coached position for 20 years across multiple different schools. And when he got to Iowa, they had some medical retirement issues. They had players that they had to play way too early, like Connor Colby, who now plays for the 49ers. He probably shouldn't have played as a true freshman, but he had to because there's no depth. And after 2 years of Barnett, people wanted him fired. And Kirk said, no, I've seen his work. We're going to trust the process. And all these guys had opportunities to go leave because, they don't want to hear about how they're playing at, Deacon Hill, worst offense, being the butt of every single joke across college football. Right? They had every reason to leave. And they've all credited the bonds that they have inside the locker room. They all credit George Barnett for keeping them together, and George Barnett kind of falling on the sword for them and taking all the blame. And that's just something that I think has been really impressive from his coaching standpoint. So like Logan Jones, he started off as a defensive tackle. He was an All-American defensive tackle out of high school. Iowa flipped him to center after Tyler Linderbaum, who's now probably top 3 center in the NFL, right? And there were so many similarities. 4-sport athlete, Iowa natives, both started defensive tackle, both flipping to center, same number, same weight. Like it was the parallels are crazy. Logan Jones leads that front. It actually won't be Mark calling a lot of the different protections. Logan Jones as the center is really the one, the catalyst of all that. Mark's looking more so at the DBs in the secondary and adjusting based on, if Oregon starts playing cover 2 and they flip back into cover 1 at the last second, he's looking for a lot of different stuff like that. Jennings Dunker, freak of nature athletically. And probably one of the more interesting people I've ever heard go from he made early in the year, he had a quote about some circus clown, and it somehow dove into Socrates within 3 sentences. And somehow he made sense. Just an absolute genius, dude. He'll be drafted early. And then Cade Peeper, stepping in as a first-year starter, redshirt sophomore. Earlier last month, CBS Sports had him as a first-round pick, despite only starting 5 games because of the upside that he has shown. And then obviously Trevor Lauk on the other side. He's really held it together at left tackle. That's going to be something I'm really interested about when it comes to the edge battle between Oregon's edges versus Trevor Lauk. I think Lauk's done a nice job of proving himself, but I also think athletically and the way Oregon's built, it's going to be a big test for him. And then I know I'm mentioning everybody, but I'll say Bo Stevens because he is an absolute run mauler. Bo Stevens is a run mauler. He still has to clean up some stuff in pass protection. That's why it helps when you have a mobile quarterback. But Bo Stevens is probably one of the more dominant run blockers across college football. So I think if Iowa can somehow neutralize that powerful Oregon interior defensive line, that's going to be the big matchup to watch alongside when it gets into pass protection. Can Trevor Lauk contain the edge on Mark Gronowski's blind side?
One more question, offense, and then we'll hit defense and kind of get into some kind of keys to the game to wrap. But In the situations where it is third and past the football, what have you seen from this offense? Because again, it's not a prolific passing offense by any means, but as you said, I think Gronowski is very experienced. They've got some talent out wide and even in the slot. What stands out to you about the aerial attack? Because I think that kind of gets pushed to the side a lot because we talk about the run game, we talk about the offensive line. What works when that is working? Why is it working? What makes it go?
Yeah, and I still think, again, they're looking for consistency. I do think Jacob Gill had a nice year last year for Iowa, the Northwestern transfer. He's been a little bit disappointing this year, struggled with more drops. Two guys I had to keep a very close eye on when it gets in those situations. One is Reese Vanderzee. Reese Vanderzee and Mark Gronowski had such a good connection all throughout summer and fall camp. And I'm not kidding you, is one of the strangest injuries I've ever covered. Reese Vanderzee broke a bone in his foot walking up the stairs to go get food 2 days before Iowa season opener.
Jeez. That's tough.
And at that point, we're like, okay, but like that's been the go-to guy that was going to help kind of shape everything. Vanderzee had a touchdown 2 weeks ago, 29-yarder. He's a big wide receiver. He can go up and get it. And more importantly, Gronowski trusts him in those situations. He will make those throws. Another name to keep an eye on, he's had a slow couple weeks, Sam Phillips. About 5'6" on a good day. They'll list him at 5'7", but probably 5'6" on a good day. But athletically, he's probably a guy that can at least match up with Oregon. I won't say surpass, but that's a guy who can create some problems. He can create separation. He has very, very good hands. He's a smooth route runner. I think they'll look to target him probably across the middle in a lot of those third down situations. But other than that, like a big issue Iowa's had in those situations is 3rd and 7, hypothetically, right? They're running routes at 3rd and 6. They catch it for 6 yards, results in a 4th and 1. There has been a real disconnect and an inconsistency with just the awareness of, okay, this is the line of game. We need to end the route here. And I asked Kirk about a couple weeks ago, and he said, look, I want people to realize we're not coaching them to go a yard short of their sticks, right? They're trying to get them over. So again, those are the things that'll make and break you, I think, against Oregon. And I think I've seen some of the best play calls of Tim Lester happen on 3rd and long, and I've seen some of the worst and the most predictable. Look for Caden Weechin to get out in screen situations because he's one of Iowa's biggest, most dynamic playmakers. And honestly, I'll be interested about how Oregon, plays defensively against Gronowski. Are they going to implement a quarterback spy on him? Are they going to bring additional pressure? Mm-hmm. Are they going to say, hey, you're not running the ball, we're going to make you throw it? Again, it sounds so basic, surface level, but Gronowski also runs like a fullback. Mm-hmm. That's the way Tim Lester described it. He'll put his shoulder down. He's done a little bit better job of protecting himself, but this is a guy that where if it's 3rd and 8 and his first 2 options aren't there, he will escape the pocket. He will not hesitate to go out and get you some yards.
That's one of the things that really stood out in watching what I have seen of Iowa is just the size. And he's an explosive runner, but this is a guy who can bounce off tackles, like impressive lower leg drive. 235 is what he's listed at. That's a problem in the open field, regardless of the position you play, but especially with some momentum. I know that's something that will be potentially big in this game. Is just like which quarterback is more effective when they have to improvise. And for Oregon, it's been kind of hit and miss with Dante Moore. It's something that's been talked about a lot coming out of Indiana. Let's go to the other side of the ball and talk about that matchup for Oregon's offense for Dante Moore. And I guess we'll just start with this from an Oregon's perspective of the 2 games we've seen Dante struggle against Indiana and Wisconsin is kind of hard to parse because he was knocked out 3rd play of the second half. It was in an absolute downpour. I didn't have a great game before that, but a lot of factors played into it. But even in that first half against Wisconsin and specifically against Indiana, they just threw a lot of different looks at a young quarterback, and he had a really hard time adapting. I mean, you mentioned kind of the order of operations pre-snap for Iowa in terms of setting protections and kind of having an understanding of what the defense is throwing at you. That was an area that you came out of that game saying, hey, Oregon has been super benefited by the fact that they've had Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel the last 2 years, 2 quarterbacks who were very comfortable pre-snap and kind of making sure you just got into the right looks. That's not been the story of Dante Moore to this point. And I just wanted to ask you, David, does that feel like a thing Iowa does enough that you think that could get in a young quarterback's head? Or is this we're going to be kind of predictable at the line of scrimmage? We're not going to be particularly creative, and we're just going to maul you with size and athleticism. What do you think Dante Moore's day is going to look like in terms of how Iowa will choose to approach and attack him?
Yeah, so a couple things. One, I count the Wisconsin game as a wash for Dante Moore. I know like a lot of people have talked about my board. I've been asked about this week, and I'm like, look, I'm not going to overread into it. It was a mess there. And that's why I'm very intrigued about the weather on Saturday, right?
Yep.
Is it going to be a similar situation from that standpoint? But like I've said, I think Dante Moore is the top 5 quarterback in college football. Like I am very, very high on Dante Moore. In past years, I would have said Phil Parker and his DBs are going to sit back and wait for you to make a mistake. That's what they do so well on there, so fundamentally sound. Because again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. Iowa does not get the most athletic players in the world, but they get solid, fundamental guys who understand the game at a high level. And that's why like they transition so well to the NFL for the most part, right? Xavier Wampa is an exception because I know Xavier Wampa, the former 5-star safety, former 5-star, played a lot of football for Iowa. Everybody wanted him. Cohen Entringer, pretty athletic guy alongside him now. Iowa's actual cornerbacks, I still think lack a little bit of athleticism, but again, TJ Hall's been stellar this year. In past years, Iowa would sit back and let whoever's playing there make a mistake. Iowa has dialed up the pressure so much more this season.
Okay.
I'm talking safety blitzes. I'm talking, Mike linebacker blitzes, weak side, mixing and matching, lining up Aaron Graves on the outside, throwing Max Llewellyn on the inside, who leads Iowa in sacks. Like they will mix and match to whatever they want to do. And they've disguised a lot more. And I think that's something that Iowa is going to do against Dante Moore. I think, especially if it's bad weather, I think they're going to sell out. I think they're going to continue to dial up the pressure, and they're going to try to rattle him early. And the way, Kinnick Stadium is built, you'll see it. The north end zone gets so loud when everybody gets into it. Communication issues, rattling opposing young quarterbacks. It's happened time and time again. I'll go back to the last ranked matchup against Penn State. You might remember this. So Sean Clifford got knocked out. And again, it was a horrible situation for Taquan Roberson to go in there. It's not fair for any backup to go in there.
Right.
They had 3 straight false start penalties all in a row in the end zone because they didn't have a silent count. Really, really good. And obviously he couldn't hear him clap. So if Iowa backs Dante Moore up and they rattle him early, I'm very curious how he's going to be able to respond to that sort of pressure. But at the same time, let's not act like Dante Moore is not a freak athlete in his own right. He is a speedy guy who can hurt you, and that has hurt Phil Parker's defenses in the past. Like I think back to maybe bigger bike. I mean, I'm talking like Terrell Pryor, Ohio State, like even Sean Clifford when he got out and used his legs. Like guys that almost glide rather than actual like, like style of running. Like some guys just glide, some guys are just absolute speedsters. But I will be very interested. And this is one of my criticisms of Dante Moore. He's got to protect himself more as a runner because knowing Xavier Wampa, knowing a few other of Iowa guys, they will look to lay the freaking wood on him, and they want him to feel it. So I think Iowa's going to implement a quarterback spy. I think they're going to blitz. I think they're going to disguise a little bit more than they have in past years. And, like you said, based on tail of the tape, I think that's the way Iowa probably should approach it with the young quarterback like Dante, whose upside I think is ridiculous.
Other thing I'm curious about is, and this has been a thing that Oregon fans have been clamoring for since the Indiana game, and certainly even before that, is just establishing the run game, because they saw even in the second half in the second quarter against Indiana, they established the ground game and they just kind of went away from it in the second half. Obviously, the last 2 weeks, that was pivotal in the success they had. Put up huge numbers, running back Jordan Davis and a true freshman over 100 yards both games, first time in his career. That is a strength-on-strength matchup. This is the number 2 rush offense in the Big Ten versus the number 1 rush defense in the Big Ten in Iowa. Iowa, you've already mentioned some of the names, but some all-conference NFL unquestionably players up there. What do you make of that matchup? Because I think in a perfect world, if you're painting the picture for Oregon, we know Dante Moore might have some difficulties in this game. The weather, which I would love to hear at some point what the forecast is supposed to be, what you're expecting out there, maybe what I'm flying into on Friday is going to be like, because I'm hoping I don't like bumpy trips, man. I like to be able to land, and you mentioned the word glide. I like to just glide and kind of land smooth. If they can establish the run game, that feels like a way to offset some of the pressure that Iowa certainly wants to put on Dante Moore, and that Oregon would probably prefer not to. So give me kind of the rundown there on what you've seen. Obviously, this is, like I said, a good-on-good matchup without question. 2 of the better units on the ground. What stands out to you there, and kind of what are you expecting to see from that group?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's exactly what Oregon should do. They should try to take the pressure off Dante more. Yes, he's stellar. Yes, he's one of the best playmakers that Oregon has. But at the same time, the more pressure, and you want the ball in his hands a lot, but the more, that if you can chunk Iowa and just sort of bully your way across the field, I think that's going to bring a lot of confidence for the Ducks, right? So I'm looking at, Aaron Graves has been a massive part. Aaron Graves is a freak athlete. And if you look him up, I'm not kidding you, he looks like the human embodiment of Mr. Incredible. Like from a face, from a haircut, like he looks like Mr. Incredible. It's a permanent Halloween costume, right? I'm keeping a close eye on Aaron Graves. I think if he can really win the battle in the trenches, I think that'd be a huge part. Bryce Hawthorne, been a little bit spotty here and there, but Bryce Hawthorne is a freak athlete. He's made some big plays for Iowa this season in the middle there. And then Ethan Hurkett, he's been such a big leader for Iowa just throughout the past couple of years. Has not had the best pass rush season, but you talk about a guy who knows how to contain the edge, force guys in situations they don't like, undersized defensive end, but a guy who's just a quality football player. He gets that job done. Max Llewellyn, I don't think seals the edge as well, but that's a guy who has a lethal swim move, lethal spin move, and he is not afraid to get physical and really, really attack the quarterback in those pass situations. But I think Iowa's rush defense has been very good. I mean, that's just been a constant steady under Phil Parker's defense. I will say the one concern I've had about this defense, I had two entering the season, and I subsided one of them. One is, do they have a lockdown corner? I mean, you think about like Cooper DeJean, Desmond King. Think about just other guys like Josh Jackson, guys who made the NFL, big Amani Hooker, all those guys. TJ Hall's become not quite that level, but he's been very, very close. And then Iowa's linebacker play. A big change happened a couple weeks ago. Jane Harrell got hurt for Iowa. He's at middle linebacker. He's near 100%, but Iowa is still giving the starting nod to Jade Montgomery. Only about 5'10" on a good day. So he's a very undersized Mike, but he's been a dangerous blitzer. He's been a guy who's been consistent for Iowa and at least a step up. Carson Shire's been pretty, at least steady, I would say serviceable, but not quite the level that Iowa linebackers have become accustomed to. Again, like Jay Higgins was ridiculous for Iowa the last couple of years. Then before that, he had Jack Campbell. You kind of go down the lineage of Kirk Ferentz, Mike linebackers. They're pretty ridiculous. But the other guy who I think could be the biggest X factor in this game, it's going to be Cash Zach Lutmer. He's been stellar in run support, had a pick 6 against Minnesota in the last game. He's like a kind of a Cooper DeJean light, but he's extremely physical at the point of attack, and he's a good athlete. I don't want to say quite an Oregon level athlete, but it's getting up there. So again, Iowa's rush defense has been stellar this season, but at the same time, I also think Oregon is a brand new sense of athleticism and speed that Iowa is maybe seen only against Indiana. And even then, like, I'd still probably give the athletic nod to the Ducks, right? And this will lead probably the keys to the game, but I just wrapped up my podcast. If this game is about physicality and domination in the trenches, I think Iowa has the leg up. If Iowa allows Oregon to run tight screens, allow Dante Moore to get comfortable and to showcase their athleticism, it's going to easily favor the Ducks. So it's about what tempo is this game going to be played at?
Yeah, I know I'm in total agreement there. And I think one of the things that stands out to me on that front is the explosive plays. Oregon produces more plays of 20 yards or more than anyone in the country. Iowa allows, I believe it was the fewest or the second fewest. And then you go to 40 yards, which are kind of the two parameters I look at to just measure explosives. And again, Oregon, one of the better teams there. Iowa, one of the better at limiting those. So I think that's going to be a big part. You talk about tempo. It's just, we saw Oregon most recently against Rutgers. I think they finished with 14 or 15 plays of 20 yards or more in one game. I mean, it was just shot after shot, big run play after big run play. And then we saw against Indiana and Rutgers, I don't know if they even hit half that total in those two games combined. And again, the Wisconsin weather was a contributing factor there. So I'm in total agreement with you there, David. If that's part of the keys to the game, maybe give me what another key is, maybe just specifically for the Iowa offense. And then if you want to give a score prediction or where your head's at there, I don't know if I want to always put the pressure on people, because sometimes you like to make that known on your own podcast in terms of releasing it. But wherever direction you want to take that part, just kind of a sense of kind of what your expectations are for Saturday. So
I want to give a shout out to you, because you're the reason why I have this as my key of the game, because I read it from one of your stories. So again, Ducks got a good writer there. The punt return game, man.
Yeah,
The
right.
punt return game. Caden Weechin is the most dangerous return man in college football. I think he's going to win the Jet Award for the second straight year. You and I sitting here today recording this podcast, Erik, have more punt return yards than the Ducks have allowed this season. So I want to give a big shout to our athleticism and our mainstay of a constant work that we put out for that. But the one thing is, will Caden Weechin have a shot at returning? Because this sounds crazy to some people, but it makes sense in my head, so I'm going to say it. Will the Ducks get thrown off if they actually have to tackle somebody on a punt return?
Yeah.
Because they've haven't
had to do it.
Like that, that's what they might be like, oh my gosh. Like one of my big keys to the game for Indiana was they hadn't faced adversity all year. And Iowa put them through adversity, and then obviously they responded. Mark Gronowski got hurt, whatever. But that's why that game was so close, is because they were able to apply the pressure and put them in a different situation. Caden Weechin, if you miss him once or twice, he has the speed. He has the short area quickness. He'll be gone, right? So if Oregon's gunners don't do their job and you allow Caden Weechin to break one off, I think that's going to be a big key to this game. And I'll even go so far as to say this. I don't think Iowa's offense is going to have a great day against Oregon. But if he gets you 45 punt return yards, it's 4.5 first downs. That's something that the total offensive stats won't be able to show you. And that's why Iowa won 10 games with Deacon Hill as the starting quarterback. Because they had all that hidden yards. They had the pick sixes. They had a great field goal kicker, and they could return punts. So I think Weechin, if he gets a shot, I think he has a realistic chance of breaking one. I don't know who I'm picking. Otherwise, I would tell you, because I really don't like to hide that. I am leaning toward Oregon. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I think this is one of the most intriguing, interesting matchups between two totally different teams. Mm-hmm. And I've been excited for this all season. I've said this all off season. Like, I think people were very underrating what this matchup was going to be. I'm leaning Oregon. I'll see how I wake up tomorrow morning when our preview gets released. I probably need to make up my mind, but hell, I might text you Saturday morning and be like, hey, you know what? Might be flipping my pick, man. But I think it's going to be a lot of fun matchup. I'm keeping a close eye on that hidden yardage. I'm going to keep a close eye on if Mark Gronowski, who's again, won an FCS Heisman, won 2 national titles at the FCS level. Like, obviously it's a step up, but this is a guy who shows up when the lights are brightest. And I don't think they're getting much brighter than Big Noon kickoff being there. And obviously you have Brad Nessler and CBS 2:30 kickoff Central Time. I know Pacific Time's a little bit earlier than that. It does not get much bigger than the stage than these two teams are going to be on.
I'm fired up. I'll be honest. I'm excited to be out there. You gave me some dinner recommendations. I'll have to report back to you probably off podcasts on how those go on Friday night.
I do think, by the way, Friday night, your flight in should be smooth. I probably should have had that in there too, since you asked that. The weather will not get bad probably until Saturday morning. It sounds like it's going to be low 40s. It's going to be rainy and wind gust up to like 25. So, I mean,
that was very, very similar to Autzen for the Wisconsin game, especially in the second half. David, really appreciate the time. Like I said, I will see you out there on Saturday. Excited to check out a new venue. Excited to see how Oregon responds to, I would say, some adversity, at least for the fan base has been talking that way after Wisconsin, a game they were favored to win by like 31.5 points, and they won by 14. You've already kind of gone through some of the details. 12:30 Pacific time for our listeners on CBS, 2:30 p.m. Central local time for kickoff. I will be out there. You can follow me on the site, and we'll have our preview show with our student reporter, our star 5-star John Evans tomorrow, Thursday afternoon. So please join us for that. For David of HawkeyInsider, this has been Erik Skopil signing off. Talk to you later, folks.